So it strikes me that there's an incredible amount of wasted effort in the system right now, in the sense that why do we need 1,000 different fluid dynamics courses 101? And I get the brand differentiation issue, but frankly, most of them are not that well designed from an instructional design standpoint or from a learning sort of science standpoint. And we've got, Ken doing great work over here that could sort of inform it. Why aren't those 100 instructors plus some of the researchers getting together to design the one course that just keeps getting better and better and everybody distributes it? I mean, why do we need that? Especially since really, actually, Dr. Chuck said in his, Python for Everybody course, OCW made the value of the materials and the pedagogy basically zero, right? That's not what people are paying for anymore. They're paying for the degree. And so, yeah, we could have, assessments. We could have the one assessment too, or certification sort of standard, or that could be a place for differentiation if that turns out to be important. So it's sort of a way, that's a feasible way to collaborate and to marshal our resources and to really do some good, because the difference between design, Khan Academy has said, I did 4 videos before breakfast. I went to Wikipedia for 15 minutes and I made a 15-minute video, and I did that 4 times. I know from my own experience, but also reading the literature, that it takes hundreds, if not thousands, of hours of development for 1 hour of delivered content when you're actually trying to apply learning science and these frameworks and get the assessment designed in with the content instead of being an add-on after the fact that people flip through but isn't formative, isn't driving the learning. So anyway, that's just a question. Why are we not doing that?
So I think there are a couple of myths. One myth that has been discussed or promoted is that there's a best professor. I think there was this idea that you would find the best person and you'd put them online and then everybody would want that thing. I think that from a student standpoint, people want something that's customized, that's personal, they feel a connection with it. There's a whole bunch of other issues besides the learning science and the kind of demonstrable mastery of identifiable skills. I think there's also a myth that college is a bunch of courses. I was at some occasion and some guy had been drinking the Kool-Aid that most of us also enjoyed and said, oh, in the future, you'll get the best courses from the best professors and you won't have to go to college, you'll stay home. So I said, wait a minute. What was the high point of college for you? And he paused for a minute and he said, I'm not going to tell you. So I said, I rest my case. So I think that the model that Ken talked about, and really what you see if you go to Khan Academy, is all their involvement in schools. The model that Ken talked about really involves, teachers and some sophisticated material. So I don't know exactly whether you buy a whole package course from one place, but I don't think that that's the world we're going to. As it currently sits, I think a book is at one end of the spectrum, college as an experience is another, and what we have in MOOCs is somewhere in between, and we're not sure where it's going to end up, but it's not really substitutable for college.
May I also a comment? Because in our institution, we're actually actively promoting teachers to look at other courses, course materials, open courseware before they start producing anything. That helps a bit. So they look at other materials, and some of the professors were really happy what they found, and they are using it now. We have a course on climate change and ethics, and there are materials used from MIT, from UQ, and it's an illustration, it's something they can talk about, it's case material, so don't take the whole course, but they take parts of it. But it is a very hard task to find it, because they had to take a whole MOOC to find the nice pieces. So finding the right things is a tedious task. We've got one dean of our schools who said, I'm not going to do any MOOCs, I've got enough students, I'm not going to make Fluids 101, but I want to use the best material out there. We had to attract a team of 3 people to scan all material out there, and still it was so much work, it would have been easier to make it yourself. So there is something we need to fix before you can find content, and that's just the content part. So there is still a lot to do.
A couple of comments. Was it fluid dynamics was the area? How many textbooks are there? There's probably not just a single textbook. There's probably 4 or 5 of them. So the continuum isn't only 10,001. There's everything in between. For instance, at UQ, I'm looking at statistics, and out of our biggest courses, 4 of them are introductory statistics in science, in health, in biology, and in economics. But they all teach basically the same thing with a slight bent on them. But our guy who teaches it in economics has a new pedagogy that he's developed over a number of years, and a lot of data that shows that it really works significantly better than other ways of teaching statistics. So I'm thinking, should we turn this into a MOOC and get it out there? So I Google statistics MOOC, 2,500. So what does that mean? Is it over-serviced, or is just no one done it really well? So, you know, it's going to be a hard decision. Do we do that? You know, we think we might have something that's of real value, that can contribute to the field. It's obviously a field that there's big demand for. So I think this is the whole idea of an open platform. Things will sort out eventually, and they probably won't sort out to a single one being everyone's accepted best.
I did want to also reply to Mike on the why are we replicating. I mean, what could we do? I don't think that you're going to, okay, suppose that you're, teaching, there are 2,000 universities and there are 2,000 engineering schools, there are 2,000 different fluid mechanics courses. And I don't think you're ever going to reduce that replication of effort from 2,000 to 1. But even if groups of 3 or 5 instructors of a fluid mechanics course were collaborating on their version of a combined course, there would be a reduction in effort by 3, so overall, or 5. And so that would be a plus. And I think that the way that can happen, the way I imagine it can happen is again, the social dimension. So why do you work together with some people? Why do I work together with the people that worked in my course? A couple of them, I knew them from before. I respected their work, or there was something about their work that made me believe they would be good partners, and then we tried working together, and it turned out to be good. If it didn't turn out to be good, then you're out, and the next one comes in, and then eventually you form a team. In the sense of, sometimes you make a team and somebody doesn't contribute very much, and then you say, well, the next time I'm going to do this, I'm not going to invite you to be a part of this team. That happens, but there's a social dynamic for that. You end up working with the people you like. So you like in the sense, I trust you. We kind of are in the same wavelength. There's some value system that we share. For example, open source. If there was a professor that didn't value open source in the same way that I do, releasing everything under Creative Commons, releasing all of the code on GitHub, then we couldn't have collaborated. So there is a value system that needs to be shared. But I think the social dimension is important. Making connections among people and networking and being open to make that invitation that let's work together on this and encourage those. It's a networking effect as well. Once we make the decision that collaborating in teaching is something that we value, I believe we're going to be looking for those opportunities. Andres.
Question number 2.
Yeah, John is my boss, so when he always looks very worried when I start speaking. But but I think, Paul, you were asking for insults from the audience. So I'm going to apply it. So I found that working with colleagues across institutions is relatively easy and very fruitful and efficient. But I found consistently that as soon as the law divisions of the institutions become involved, it's like sand raining into gears. And I know that, I understand it because the General Counsel is paid to think in terms of worst case scenarios. That is their role. I totally understand that. But it gets very difficult. They don't read email. They don't like email because it's discoverable. You have to talk to them in person all the time. And so I would say, if you start with the legal people and just have them comfortable, everything else kind of seems to fall into place, and vice versa.
It's an infrastructural facilitation that needs to happen.
If you would have done that, Coursera and edX wouldn't have happened.
You know, take your lawyer to lunch. I think that's Andreas's, kind of thing. Good call.
Right. So my question, I have a question that's similar. I have on the legal issues is, when you collaborate with a lot of people from different countries, you have different intellectual property regimes and rules and all that. And I have on my list of things to read is Justice Breyer's new book. So what kind of guidance can you give to faculty who are trying to develop IP in a global context?
Okay, so let me try to respond to that because in addition to being vice provost, I'm a law professor and I do work on both intellectual property and the globalization of law and the way law deals with the fact that human activity crosses borders and law tends not to. So I have things to say, but I'll say them kind of as succinctly as I can in the most practical terms. I think intellectual property need not be the big problem. I actually think privacy is a bigger problem than intellectual property. Intellectual property, as long as universities are willing to let professors keep their intellectual property, so for instance at GW, we take the position that if we do an online course with a professor, even if we do tons of video and tons of animation and extra instructional design and add stuff to the course, all of it exclusively is owned by that professor. We don't take any intellectual property. We only get a non-exclusive license to present it for a period of years. But if the professor goes to another university, they can take the whole thing with them. We just get to keep using it for 3 years, given that we funded it. If you do it that way, I don't think the intellectual property is going to be the big problem. It is true that maybe you would have difficulty because the thing that you created would get used by someone else in some other country that doesn't have a strong intellectual property regime. So maybe that's what you're talking about. I think for most professors, that's not the end of the world. They want their ideas out there anyway. So I'm not so worried about that. And I'm interested to hear sort of exactly where OGC's General Counsel's office interfere with institutional collaboration. My experience is that, I work a lot with our OGC's office, that they are not the problem. My experience is that the departments, the structures of promotion, the course load structures, the incentive pay structures, those things actually make it much harder. And it's not the OGCs, but I'd be interested to hear more about it.
I'll say in a moment.
I have add something because in Delft we have a bit of a different policy on intellectual property. The professors don't own it. For educational content they produce, so it's all owned by the university, and we publish all under a Creative Commons license. And indeed, they don't care that it is being used anywhere else in the world, which makes it quite easy. But I think
that would be the other way to
outlier.
make it easy.
It's the other outlier.
Yeah.
So I just want to bounce on all the discussions that just happened. So I see it as two options, and there is the negative option that I outlined, the doomsday scenario, but there is also a hopeful me that is dual to that. So we can do two things. We can data mine on students, we can data mine on the people, or we can data mine on the content. We can start building search engines for educational material that helps connect individuals with the best content. That's one option. Or we can start data mining on the students, do learning analytics, or do other things, try to match up people with jobs. And that's another more negative option in my own mind. So I want to highlight this distinction and also highlight the fact that you have Google that has created a great search engine, but that hasn't been that much improved over, like the concept of a search engine hasn't improved over the years, while the data mining on people has improved. So they've chosen one path, and the same thing in the ad tech business, where instead of offering the best news, you're actually data mining on the people reading the news. So this is a duality, and I think as researchers, we should aim to data mine on content to try to improve our knowledge, because that's our own goal, right? It's to improve knowledge for the world. So try to consolidate knowledge, try to organize it, try to produce new knowledge on the knowledge itself that we have. And that's the more hopeful side of me, I guess.
On that, I'd say what we should do is data mine on the jobs, which is already happening with Seek.com and all of these jobs markets. Data mine on the content, as you suggest, and it's a big feature request. You're listening, Beth? And provide all of that to the learners, and then let them have the choice as to whether they want to publish credentials and things. And that would be a perfect world.
Since I'm going at this by stating my personal opinion here, I might as well go with this too. I think that although it's important for us to have, as universities, the ability to develop things as we like and to have open source platforms and so on, I think we also would be extremely we will not do well if we do not collaborate well with private companies. In any activity that universities go into, you need to collaborate with relevant industry. There are things you can do more easily in a company than a university, and we all have to recognize that. And a position that's kind of profit for private companies is probably completely counterproductive.
Okay, last question.
So we've talked about the intellectual property of faculty, which I think is important, and I'm wondering about the intellectual property of students. So going back to Paul's slide of learner versus student, and I'm concerned that we might be going towards a MOOC sphere where the platform owns that content, like Facebook, and I'm wondering, that seems like a huge barrier for collaboration. So could a similar principle be applied where the student owns all of their own content?
So first of all, just to address the privacy thing, since you raised it again. So at least at GW, we have taken the position that FERPA applies to our MOOCs the same way it applies to anything else that we teach on campus. And so we can't share data without at least following the protocols. Now, as it turns out, universities talk about FERPA all the time. They tend to overinterpret what FERPA actually requires, and I'm not aware of any actual FERPA prosecutions that have been brought. So I generally think universities worry too much, OGC's office worry too much about FERPA, but I do think that whatever privacy concerns exist, I don't think just calling it a MOOC gets you out of them. And the other thing I would say is I do think we are headed towards an interesting collision, particularly when we start trying to do adaptive learning well, right? So right now, adaptive learning to me hasn't gotten there yet. And every vendor who comes and tells me they've got a great adaptive learning system has disappointed me, right? Because mostly it's just, they do a quiz of 100 questions, and based on their answer, you get, different questions. And it's not really adaptive learning. It's sort of the beginnings of maybe something. But if you could really take fine-grained data, and based on that data, you do better when you do the question at 11 a.m. and you do better when you click over here first. And so then we start telling you should always click there first because you think that way or whatever. If you could do that stuff well, it starts running into privacy concerns. And so all of the things that would help you do really good, adaptive, fine-grained, educational resources that are tailored to each individual student are precisely the same kinds of data analytics that are going to get concerns raised about privacy and data aggregation and so forth, particularly when it's done by a third party and particularly when it's done by a for-profit third party. And I don't know what the solution is, but I can tell you those are going to run together, and they're going to run together in law because, at least in the US, Congress is increasingly interested in data privacy in the educational sphere, particularly in K through 12, and particularly when we're talking about for-profit providers. And so there's going to be regulation, and the question is, will that regulation then squelch a lot of the fine-grained data analytic, good educational innovations that might come of it, or is there some way to navigate that? And that's just an open question that I'll raise.
Were you hinting at user-generated content and IPing that?
Yeah, so I think you were talking about behavior and analytics. I was thinking more of user-generated content.
Discussion posts. So.
Well, we've had a MOOC professor who used his MOOC network to write a book on this topic, and he used his MOOC network to write research papers where his MOOC participants were collecting data for him and contributing to the research. So I think that is an interesting value of MOOCs and MOOC networks. So it will be an issue if you want to IP all that's being done. But as you've heard me say before, we don't do that. So then it's not an issue. So be very strict in everything open, and you don't encounter any issues.
And she's helped us be very liberal in sharing data with other institutions, which I think has been a big, I think that's the right path for building a research community.
Other comments? Okay, I think we're done. It's 5:05. Thank you all, and thanks one more time to Lorena for organizing.
Thanks very much.